Hey guys, James Wolf here, and today's another episode of 80 Days. I fiddled with my microphone a little bit. I'm sitting about a hand's length, my hand at least, a hand's length away, and it seems to be picking me up quite clearly. I tested it in Audacity before I started recording, because I didn't want to be recording and be way back here and have it not pick me up at all. So I'm sitting a little further away instead of right on the microphone. So, yeah. I've also turned the volume up of the microphone. And once again, I do not have my earbuds in for the computer. I have my earbuds in for my phone because I'm a little tired of listening to the music and the clapping and of the hooves and all that. Hold on. Here we go. I'm listening to Country Nation by Brad Paisley. Good artist. We're in Yokohama, Japan. Let's see what's... Seasickness pills and a magnifying glass. I don't need either. Where does the samurai sword go to? Salt Lake City, and I make $3,600. Also, I'm quite happy with myself. Oh, right. We're going to Honolulu, leaving tomorrow. Can I not negotiate it? No, I cannot. I have to, oh, no, not depart. I have to sleep the night away. Come on. There we go. Also, you may notice that I'm gonna be going in and out of this volume, because I'm used to slouching and leaning close to the microphone, because I'm not sure if it'll pick me up or not. Plus, I don't have a, what's it called? A Scarlet, right, or Focusrite Scarlet, one of those preamps that you can turn up and down. I don't have one of them. I have a 24 volt phantom power, and that is it. My microphone is literally just high enough in power that it is coming through at a decent volume. I would probably need to either find an electronic one, or I would need to go out and buy a Focusrite Scarlet, or a different preamp that I can turn the volume up and down on. But for right now, until I get the money to do so, this will be my setup. Before the night ended, I did some minor alterations to our clothing. There we go. Sorry, still learning to not lean in. There we go. Also, it's taking an immense amount of personal strength, not personal strength, like, what's the words? Like, it's taking more than it should for me not to start belting out the song in a horrible voice, by the way. Because I normally sing when I listen to music. Ask anyone around me. I normally sing. Shut the fuck up, watch. Sorry, my smartwatch is acting up. I keep shutting it off, and it keeps turning itself right the fuck back on. So, yeah. The Nolani was a new concept. We were told a hover barge making the long-distance journey from Yokohama to Honolulu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. If only it went further than Honolulu. A little bone rattling for the sake of a few days' efficiency seemed a good trade to me, but the ship had only enough fuel for the journey, even then I think only just. We and the other passengers on this inaugural crossing must have looked pale and uneasy as we set off. Even the captain was sweating. No doubt the heat was to blame. Besides, standing next to the captain was our very own artificer. So what would possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? And indeed, when disaster struck, its nature took us all quite by surprise. Read the magazine. Experimental hovercraft leaves Yokohama on maiden voyage. Oh, please don't fucking sink. Monsieur Fogg and Pespechier. The first day aboard was blissfully quiet. The ship bucked along, crossed the waves, and stayed down. And I stayed down. Jesus Christ, what the fuck's going on? Down below with my master, ensuring he was comfortable. In the evening, I sat with one Mademoiselle Carlotta, a flashy American gold prospector who is apparently extraordinarily rich, though she carried herself like someone who had only come into wealth recently. Evening came with no sign of the artificer or the captain. Perhaps they were busy ensuring we stayed upright in the water. So basically what they've done is they've taken a boat, stuck a giant-ass fan on the back, and a cushion of air underneath. That's all they've done. We noticed the trouble when my bread roll slid from the side of my plate and rolled against the side of the craft quickly, followed by another passenger's wine glass. I stayed seated. It was clear enough what was happening. The entire ship was listing to the left. A moment later, a strange noise began to issue from the engines below. It sounded somewhat like a scream. The only other person in the dining car was the retired detective, Monsieur Jeffers. I looked over at Monsieur Fogg, who looked most appalled by this sudden sideways movement. I stumbled to my feet and made for the exit from the room. The shrieking noise from the engine stopped, but the boat did not right itself. Perhaps it would be useful to ascertain the cause of this misalignment, my master suggested. Yes, monsieur, I replied, heading from the dining car to the engine room to find our artificer. Negotiating the corridors was a difficult proposition due to our stubborn tilt. But I could sense, slowly moving back to upright once more. Perhaps we were not about to sink after all. Suddenly, Mademoiselle Carlotta leapt into my path. Monsieur! She hissed. Please step aside, mademoiselle, she said gently. I said gently, I must get to the engine room. I have just come from there, she replied, her expression aghast. And Passepartout, she stumbled, her voice in terror. Tell me, please. It is Madame our artificer, Passepartout. She is dead! I hurried to the boiler room, and it was true. Mademoiselle was not only dead, the circumstances told a clear story. She had been murdered. The weapon lay close by. From the doorway, Mademoiselle Carlotta, something, breathed. That katana, Passepartout, it is yours, right? I looked down at it. Funny at first, I had not recognized it because of the blood pooled around it. But how did it get here? I whispered. And what are you doing here? Mademoiselle Carlotta replied, equally quiet. Replied. She took a step away, then suddenly fled from the room. I was left with the body and weapon and terrible anticipation of what would happen next. She framed us. She's framing us, or trying to at least. But wait a minute. You motherfucker! The next day, the investigation, such as it had was begun in earnest, the captain demanded to talk to everyone, but of course everyone had an alibi. The time of death was declared by Monsieur Jaffer as being 2 or 3 hours before the body was discovered, based on his experience and the temperature of the corpse. But I am no doctor, he added. So your assessment is approximate. Assessment is approximate, I asked. It is, but a few hours at least must have passed between Madame X's death and Mademoiselle Carlotta's discovery of her. The flesh, Passepartout, was quite chilled. Could not be sealed because the crew needed access to the boiler, which was still making curious noises. At least we were fully upright once more. There was no doubt the culprit was still on board, but was no clues to suggest who it might be. But the weapon that belonged to us and had been spirited out of our own locked cabin. That, the Captain Huff, is the only piece of true evidence we have. Passepartout, where were you and your master at the time of the crime? I told the truth. Sorry, I'm readjusting. I told the truth. I was taking a turn on the deck alone. My master, I believe, was in the drawing room, also alone. Monsieur Fogg put in helpfully. The captain nodded. It does not look good, gentlemen. But what possible motive could we have? I protested. The captain shrugged. I am a captain, not a police detective. Of course, is simple. Our course is simple, Monsieur Fogg said directly. We are in the ocean. There is nowhere for us to run. Therefore, no need to imprison us. Here is our offer. Let us discover the true culprit by the time we reach port, or you may arrest us for the crime. I rubbed my hands. A chance to save ourselves. The captain nodded. Very well. You have until we dock. Once he was gone, Monsieur Fogg turned to me. Passepartout, our situation is desperate. We must uncover the truth. What will you do? I demanded. I will consider the matter, Monsieur Fogg replied. There were only a few days remaining. I dressed up my list of suspects and got to work. There was no time to lose. Okay, we have a couple days. I began my investigations. Mademoiselle, you must help me, I began. Mademoiselle nodded, though I could see fear in her eye, and she demanded to talk out on the open deck in view of the bridge. Afraid I'm gonna murder you? Murderer? Whatever I can do. Where were you when the crime occurred? I was in my cabin. I have an alibi for that. You'll be pleased to hear. The ship's butler brought me my glass of my gin and tonic about an hour before dinner, right about when Jeff first said it happened. Tell me about yourself. What brings you aboard? She shrugged. I made my money in gold on the west coast of America, she said. Now I own a small shipping line, but it is a hobby, really. And what brings you on this boat? Research! I was going to make an offer to buy her whole fleet, but I don't think that offer would be worth very much now. Have you lost a lot of money? No, though I have not earned any either. She folded her arms suddenly. But what about you? Where were you when it happened? I was taking my turn on the deck, but you seem determined to find someone to blame. Goodness, Pesperture, does the captain seriously think you did it? Never mind my predicament, mademoiselle. She looked at me with sympathetic eyes. It is a terrible thing to be accused of that which you did not do. You found the body. What were you doing in the engine room? What do you think? She exclaimed with a perfect surprise. The boat was about to capsize. It was tipping right over. I hurried down to the boiler room to see what was going on and if I could help. Did you right the boat? I did, as it happened. There's a valve which was stuck. I opened it, and the boat settled once more. So you know how the boat works. No, she exclaimed. Only the artificer knows. Only the artificer knows that. I just know about one simple valve, that's all. I thanked her for her time. Had I learned anything? I could not be sure. I hope I can just accuse someone and they'll just go with it. Because it's her. I'm blaming her even if it's not her. Just fuck her. I spent the next day at the scene. Several feet had trampled through it by now, of course, and there had been ample chance for the murderer to come in and remove anything incriminating there might be left behind. Even the dust had drifted away, though, through the open porthole. Sorry. But perhaps there was something small they had not considered. I hunted in the dust along the edges of the machines, in every nook and cranny, but I found nothing. Suddenly the boat listed, and the machine made a squealing noise, though not as loud as the one the other day. And I looked at the controls, fearing disaster, but it seemed the artificer was tending her ship, even from beyond the grave. A lever snapped, the pistons pumped, a valve opened, and a blast of cold air shot out across the floor of the boat. Then the flap closed, and the boat tilted back upright, and the cold air spread away. Presuming it was some regular function of the boat that helped to keep it upright. The exact workings were artifice beyond my skill. Of course. With that, I left the engine room. That night, I remembered to adjust the pocket watch as we crossed the international date line and gained ourselves a day. It doesn't reset, though. A few days down, and I felt I had learned very little. Or, if I had learned a lot, I was too confused to see it. To try and clear my head, I spent a few hours talking to Monsieur Jeffra. Monsieur! You know what? I'm not reading all of this. Just, I'll leave it up long enough that you can read it. Mulling over what I learned so far, it was not much, in truth. I believe I have a theory, I replied nervously. The captain nodded briskly. I am glad to hear it. We will gather everyone together and you can discuss what you have discovered. Why gather everyone? I can tell you now. We must have witnesses to it, said the captain. We all will be judge and jury. We must hear the evidence you have collected, untampered and unprepared, myself included. Yes, monsieur. I cleared my throat in the beginning. Of course, you know, you did it. The weapon was yours. You've no alibi, and you're a damned Frenchie to boot. The lack of a scream. I saw people sitting up sharply. We all saw the unpleasant manner of Madame Chu's death, but none of us heard it. I began to wonder how could that be. It was no doubt sadly rather brief. That was my exact conclusion here. This was a murder by a most efficient killer. They all exchanged fearful looks while I continued. The next detail is the business arrangement of Madame Chu. I saw the captain and Madame Carletta exchanging sharp looks. As you know, the artificer was the inventor of this ship. You may not know she was considering going into business with Madame Carletta, or Madame Carr. Captain shook his head. She was going into business with me and me alone. I tried to persuade her. Madame Carr admitted I tried to befriend her. I would have succeeded in the end, but now, she shrugged, now there is nothing to buy. And nothing to threaten your business, I just suggested. She shrugged. That would have been my business. But I have money. There will be another business. Monsieur Geoffrey frowned suddenly and looked up. But mademoiselle, you already own a shipping route, don't you? I own several, she snapped in return. I looked around the room. Let us consider. The personalities we see in this room. What would a valet know of the human mind, eh? Much less of the mind of a murderer. The captain is most fixated, but Madeline is most calculated. I am, she answered, but you have to be when you are rich. I could not agree, Monsieur Fogg. I could not argue, Monsieur Fogg gestured to me to continue. So then, this is the time of death. At the time told to us by Monsieur Jaffer, no one has an alibi for their whereabouts except for Madame Carletta, who was in her cabin receiving a gin and tonic from the butler. Any of us could have been in the boiler room bringing Madame Chu to grief. Indeed, but what of it? How are you sure of that time? I touched her. She was quite cold. What if she was cold for another reason? Like what? A cold blast of air. It would have to be a very long, very cold blast. Wind through an open porthole wouldn't do it. I held up my finger for silence, Mr. Jaffer. If such a thing were possible, the old detective shrugged, then I would not know for certain. A coroner would have more from the blood, but I could not. If the temperature were not a factor, she would have died any time. I nodded, satisfied. So then, this is what we have discovered. A lot of empty nonsense, I fear, Presbyterian Captain. We had an argument. He put his wrist forward. You may arrest us. The captain thought for a moment, then shook his head. I cannot do it. An English gentleman is above reproach. But someone must be to blame. Indeed, someone is, he replied sadly, and Madame Chu was my friend. I encouraged her to make this craft. I funded her experiment. I allowed her passengers on board. I should have helped to keep her safe. She was more valuable to me than you may realize. So no one could have seen something so horrific. The captain shook his head. I am still ignorant now, but Madame Chu is gone. This boat is forfeit, my captaincy too. I cannot have you two arrested. There is no evidence. Any of my crew might have done it equally well. I fear we will never know. You will dock the ship and let us all leave? The Captain Kiaka nodded, looking away. In doing so, I will be letting a murderer walk free, but there is nothing else I can, in conscience, do. With that, he left the captain, and in sober spirit, we disembarked. Badam Shoe's killer was never brought to justice. My own suspicion that Madame Carletta had been involved was left unproven. Yeah. She was definitely involved. And I'm pissed we lost it. Valuable in Acapulco, New York, and Panama City. Cotton flower. Lima and Panama City, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco. There we go. Laissez-les bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. Manila. The fuck is with Manila? Where are you going? New route discovered. What is it, a route straight to San Francisco from Manila? I have 30 days. Yeah, 30 days. It was as though Honolulu lived in one dawn breath. A wheeling swath of sky, white-laced waves, and pestin sand bound by black volcanic bluffs. The town was entirely hidden beneath groves of coconut and eucalyptus. We rested comfortably in palm-top hats by the shoreline, breathing the sea air and trying to shake the weariness of the road. The bank. The bank as we entered, a modest affair. It was hardly a befitting place of a gentleman. 2 days. Friday. Okay. How much is it costing to get to San Francisco? San Francisco. $750. Cool. That'll pay for it. Banana boat. Alright, well, I think I'm going to leave this episode off here. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave this episode off here. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you like my content and all that, please consider subscribing. And I don't mind hearing from you guys in the comment section down below. Anyway, guys, have a great, wonderful day. Bye-bye.